All right, welcome everyone. It is 9:05 and we'll call this meeting to order. Harmony, you call roll.
Director Bradley,
Here.
Director Brems,
Here.
Director Cardenas,
Here.
Director Daly,
Here.
Director Keeley, here, Director Litvak, here, Director Olson,
Here.
Director Peterson,
Here.
Director Prokopis,
Here.
Director Silvestrini,
Here.
Director Stevenson.
Here. All right, do we have any public comments? Seeing none, invite the chairs.
We just wanted to do this in public comment, and I wanted to let y'all know that we had sent out an email that Officer Michael Black had passed away from Kearns Precinct. His funeral was last Saturday, a beautiful service, but we just wanted to ask the board if we could do a moment of silence. That's okay with you?
That would be great.
Okay, let's do a moment of silence for Officer Michael Black. Thank you. And I want to thank Chief Levi Hughes from the Kearns Precinct. He handled the situation just amazing. And we just want to thank him for all the work he and his team had did with the family. Thank you.
Sheriff, we all know it's a huge loss for our organization. Thoughts of prayers out to this. And I'll just add one other comment, and that is just a reminder to everybody that we need to do our Open and Public Meetings Act training and get that certificate over to Harmony. As of this morning, we only have a couple of us who have gotten that done, so please do that as soon as possible. With that, Sheriff, you're back up.
Back again.
Yep.
Ready? Just a couple of updates. So, Lieutenant April Morris, she is attending the FBI Academy for Unified Police Department, and she graduated this morning, actually probably 20 minutes ago, they called her name. Over 200 people attended the Academy this year, and it's a really great honor to be able to attend the Academy and actually make it all the way through and graduate. It's a 10-week course. We have several here, you know, in the department that have done it, but kudos to April for all her hard work. And I believe she may be the only female out of the Unified Police Department. We did have one from the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office before Unified was created. So I'm thinking that she might be the only female so far that's had the opportunity to attend and graduate. So just kudos to her. And then I want to give kudos to our canyon cars. As many of you have seen how the weather has been and not all the stories on the news, our canyon cars have just been working diligently all winter to ensure that everybody is safe in those canyons. And I just wanted to make sure that you knew the hard work that they do every day in the canyons. It's an extremely dangerous job at times. And at other times it's just beautiful to be up there. So we want to just make sure that we thank them for all their hard work this year. And I know the weather's starting to change and we're going to have more people up there, and probably our search and rescue will become busier this year with all the hikers. So just wanted to recognize them. And that's really all I have for my update. And we have agenda.
Sure. All right, item 4, Finance Committee update.
Okay. Before I say that, thank you. Yes, I need trouble. A nightmare of a situation up there. Unbelievable. When she said, when more visitors will start coming. No, please don't. Anyway, so financial report. We had a financial meeting on the 7th of March. Sheriff's here at the sheriff's office. And we discussed a couple of things that we'll be doing in this meeting, so I won't go into them, so it'll be redundant. And as we did the fiscal 2022 to 23 quarterly budget amendments. Then we also looked at, which we won't be reviewing today, is we reviewed the 2023 fee schedule. That's like increases for services that UPD does for other people. And then lastly, I'm hoping Debbie will back me up a little bit on this one while she's talking about the amendments. Is we looked at the fiscal 2023-24 budget process, the timeline on that and where we are at this point, which we are right on point. So that's pretty brief because we'll be continuing.
All right, item 5, acceptance of donations. Chief Mazur.
Mr. Chair. Happy to see you have one donation. Brad Marshall. He was a volunteer with our drone unit for 2 iPad minis. It was $900. And he goes to be able to monitor the drones. Our program is becoming very successful. It's actually getting a lot of attention from around the Wasatch Front. Assassins to help set up their groups. In fact, we even had 2 suspects surrender to a drone, so that's a first. On a very the other day, so that was interesting. We will submit that to you for consideration.
Motion to accept the donation with appreciation.
We have a motion. Second. A motion and a second. Any discussion on that? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Yeah, that passes. Thank you. All right, item 6, approval of surplus resolution 230301.
Thank you. Again, you'll see in your packet surplus of vehicles. Very appreciative of our fleet staff. Find vehicles, which is very difficult right now. Sell those. Pretty good price for our surplus vehicles. Students, there's a shortage of vehicles out in the market. I'll submit that to you for consideration and approval.
Motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to approve resolution 23-03-01 to approve the disposition of specific fleet vehicles as indicated in the.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. Thank you, Chief. All right, item 7, fiscal year 2022-2023 budget amendments. First up, we've got the presentation of those budget amendments from Debbie Sanchez.
Oh, thank you, Chairman, members of the board. Okay, so, as Helen mentioned, we presented the quarterly amendments to the Finance Committee last Tuesday, March 7th. I would like to add an item to that amendment. I inadvertently left off that report that Holiday Precinct is experiencing problems with their security camera system. So they would like to, they can't locate the individual who did the work. With a security company who can fix and upgrade the system. And so I have added that in the request in the holiday section of the amendments. And so the amendments for the general fund include the following: proceeds from the sale of weapons, with the proceeds going into the fund balance for a total of $42,053. A non-cash donation of autism sensory kits to keep in the patrol vehicles at $7,200. The use of funds held in evidence, which have completed the adjudication process They're now available for purchase of shelving units and property and evidence. And that total is 182,094. We've got transfer of gains grant money from Fund 72 to cover overtime and benefits in Fund 10 where the expenditures are being made. We have reclasses within the general fund department that are due to the renewal of the IBE software, the dongle ID, the cancellation of the Avatar 3 robot purchase with in-lieu purchases of night vision binoculars and ballistic helmets and a few other items for a total of 88,000. Amendments for the Kearns precinct includes following cash donations to be used towards the that were used for Santa. And reclasses due to the need to catch up the heating bill that the precinct had not been receiving. So that total is 5,694. Also the need to purchase a water station for 6,472. Amendments to the holiday precinct activations that use of community events for $180. And then the use of precinct funds, precinct fund balance for the purchase of drones, headsets, computer and a fridge for 26,600. And then of course the camera system upgrade that I just mentioned, I added for $20,000. Amendments to Fund 72, Salt Lake County fully funded. We're transferring, again, as I mentioned in Fund 10, we're transferring the gains grant fund monies from here to the general fund to cover the costs that we made in the general fund. And also reclass for subscription renewal of the universal forensic extraction device. And that provides us an on-site solution to access iOS. It's been high-end Android device. So for the total fiscal impact for Fund 10, that will be 253,047. For Fund 20, it will be Kearns, it will be $950. For Fund 26, the holiday precinct, it would be 46,780. And for Fund 73 on countywide services, that would be 3,000. That would be a total fiscal impact of 319,000.
Any clarifying questions? Now I'd ask for a motion to open public hearing.
Mr. Chair, I move to open public hearing on the budget amendment.
Second.
Motion and second, any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Do we have any public comments for this item? Seeing none,
Mr. Chair, I'll move to close the public hearing.
Second.
every motion is second to close public hearing. Any discussion on that? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, public hearing is closed. With that, I would entertain a motion for the approval of the fiscal year 2022-2023 budget amendments, resolution 230302 as presented. So moved. Motion
Second.
and a second. Any discussion on that? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. All right, item 8, fiscal year 2024 preliminary budget increase maximum determination resolution 230303. Shared.
Yes, and as you all recall, the board had voted for us to do a preliminary budget increase maximum and bring it to the board by March, in the March meeting. So that's what we're doing here today. I'm going to turn the time over to our CFO, Debbie Sanchez, and she'll go.
You again. As I mentioned in the finance committee meeting when we presented the budget, I want to thank again, I want to thank the board. I want to for the guidance that you gave us as trying to keep the budget below 4%. I also want to thank the staff and the commanders and the sheriff for all the work that they put into this budget, because we were given a short timeline. It has been a challenge, and without their contributions, it would have been very difficult to get this preliminary budget increase maximum to you today. And then I want to finally, I want to thank Rick for all our work to get this budget, help get this budget to where it is right now. I also want to mention, when we met with each one of you before we went discuss the budget, we addressed the issue of apportionment that needs to be made because of the audit finding that we found. I know there's been some concerns as to the timing of when we brought that to you, so I wanted to give a timeline as to how that happened. When I got here in December, they were in the middle of the audit. I really hadn't had a lot of involvement in that. And so my involvement mostly included trying to coordinate when it would be presented to the board and get it to them. And from the day I got here, it was all about the budget. We needed to get this budget done because we had a shortened timeline. So then the budget was presented and that was it. The audit was presented, audit was out of the way. My concentration, my focus was on getting the budget out. And so we met with all of the chiefs, we went to the precincts, visited with them there. I'm a visual person, wanted to get familiar with the organization. As you know, I had a learning curve that was very short and I needed to get on that quick. Started entering the budget. We met with the board to get your maximum, you gave us 4%. And then that was very helpful. That's when we started looking at where we could make these cuts and try and reduce the budget. And again, one of the things we looked at was the history, the wage history. So we went back 3 years, we looked at that. We looked at the benefits. We were able to make cuts there. And then of course, we looked at the operations and we made those cuts there. What I discovered quickly at all of the meetings where we were discussing this budget with the board and finance committee was that you were all very interested in your fund balances. You're asking, where's our fund balance? What's our fund balance going to be? And you know, my focus was let's get that below the 4% maximum. I wasn't really looking at fund balances. I was looking at trying to get you a budget that would be under 4%. So after I presented the budget last Tuesday to the finance committee, and again, the fund balances were brought up. I met with Rick and I said, we need to look at these fund balances. And so the first place I started was the audit report to see where your fund balances were at the end of fiscal year 22. And that is when we discovered the audit finding. You know, if you're concerned about, you know, finding out something at the last minute or feeling like you're feeling blindsided, that's kind of how I felt like, oh my goodness, we've got this issue that we need to address. So I contacted the sheriff immediately. We discussed it and I contacted the auditor, and that's when, you know, all of the memories start coming back on how this had been presented to the board, the issue of the general fund balance shrinking while the members' fund balances were increased. So we pulled those documents out, and mind you, this was the night before we met with Midvale, our very first budget presentation. So I feel sorry that I'm not sure if I'm apologizing, but I do feel bad that there wasn't more advance notice. And believe me, if we could have done that, we would have, you know, when numbers aren't consuming my life, I do like to get a good night's rest. That night I didn't get a good night's rest. And trust me, if I'd have known earlier and I didn't bring it to your attention, I wouldn't have got a good night's rest the whole time in between. So I just want you to know that as soon as we found out, we brought it to each one of your attention. I just want to make that clear.
So Debbie, I mean, sure, I mean, the actual quantification, the numbers of that were something that was maybe new or had changed from, but we have talked about this before. We have talked about this, you know, as being a structural problem that is going to need to be addressed in some way. We knew that we needed to use we had discussions about using our individual fund balances to augment the general fund. We just didn't have that quantified. So I mean, nobody likes surprises, but this was previewed at least to us even before you were here, I think. So I get that. I mean, some of the other things that were interesting when we met, we've had our meeting like mid-bill to go over our anticipated budget for next year, I guess. But some of the things about the benefits and things like that were a little surprising, I guess, too. That is something that we didn't know. I mean, those were good surprises, right? But still, it you know,
And
they were surprising.
you know, I try to be as transparent as possible. And so we wanted to explain, you know, how these calculations were made in the past and how we were making them this year. And this has nothing to do with how they were calculated in the past. That, I mean, from what I'm hearing, last year was really a challenge because of the wage wars and just, you know, trying to get this budget out because we have these deadlines. And so, but this year we tried really hard to try and tighten those numbers and able to get to where we were. So we wanted to explain that to you. We wanted to make sure you could understand why we had gotten to, how we were able to get to that thing, and hopefully make you feel comfortable with the budget that we presented to you. We were really excited. We had gone over those numbers over and over and over. We were really excited when we went to the finance committee to present that, and then it wasn't long after that we had this other issue that we needed to address. So the excitement didn't last very long, but anyway.
And I also wanted to say that when we started looking at the averages, the 3-year averages, that's when Rick discovered that there's a way to change how we're doing wages. And it may have, yes, it's a good surprise and it came as a surprise, but I don't know if surprise would be the right word because we're tasked with preparing a budget and giving it to each of you. And then we have to meet with everybody, and we gave everybody the same information, but I didn't know how else to give that when, you know, we're tasked with so much in such a short amount of time. If we could have done it in the previous board meeting, we maybe could have said, hey, we're looking at these numbers and, you know, it's looking good, but I don't know how else we would break the surprise news to you that, you know, the budget's going to meet the way below the 4%, other than having the budget meetings with each one of you and coming to the board meeting. You know, if you would like more correspondence via email, maybe we could change that. So people aren't surprised in that sense. I don't know really how better way to do it other than have one-on-ones with each one of your organizations and then a board meeting.
So just a few thoughts. One is, Debbie, I think all of us here really appreciate you, and I know I'm frustrated by this situation of being 3.5 million in the hole, but that's not a you. So I know that you're new to this, and I think you're doing everything you can to get caught into. On my end, no frustration. Thank you. So I appreciate your words, but again, I don't want to take any of this personally. That's not.
Yeah, no, okay, I've been doing this for many years, so I've learned to develop a thick skin. You know? I brought this to your attention because I want you to feel comfortable that we're trying really hard to help you. That's always been my goal, is to help those that I'm serving. I know it sounds corny, but that's just how it is. And I can see it from your point of view as well. I'm sorry, I can see it from your point of view as well. Because, you know, I've worked for cities, and so I know how councils feel and the mayor feels and how important it is to have that information as soon as possible. And so I just want you to know that, yes, I'm new here and I'm trying to be as transparent as possible, but I've only been here 3 months, and I can tell you this is an excellent staff. This is an excellent organization. I could not have brought this budget to you without the commanders helping me with the revenues. It was a lot to absorb and learn, and I needed to make sure that these numbers were accurate. without, meeting with Amanda on the grants, with Mike Schoenfeld on the gang grants, with Rick, obviously, with Angie and Marcy, my staff. And the sheriff and the guidance that they gave me, it was amazing. I can tell you, as someone who's worked for a city, to try and get this budget to you in this timeframe is very challenging. And this is a huge organization. And it would not have happened without the teamwork of all these people. And this was just me being here for 3 months. So it was not all me. And I just want you to know that you have an excellent team and an excellent organization here, trying to help you. And that's from an outsider's point of view. Okay. Well,
As far as communicating, I mean, I think there's the pleasant surprises we have had in this budget. I'll tell you, I do thank all the work going into this, because this budget is looking good from our perspective. And know that there's going to be things that we're finding that we're not going to be able to communicate with well advanced notice. And I guess the challenge that I'm not a budget expert, but the challenge I run into, I know that this was talked about before, that the general fund balance was going down, and this is where last year was part of the reason that we saw these big last minute increases, because we said we can't use the general fund balance. So it's that, and again, maybe I just don't understand this of where I get confused. How did we go from that conversation of we need to stop using this to not only, oh, we hit the statutory minimum, to, oh, we're zero, to, oh, we're negative. And then that's where my frustration comes from, is that, and again, I'm looking at you, but this was not, you were not here, of as that happens. To me, it would be nice to know, okay, in our, we just hit our statutory minimum. Okay, we're below our statutory minimum. Okay, we're $1 million below our statutory minimum as we're spending these funds. And that never happened. And so now being here and saying, oh, we're $3.5 million that now we have to go make up. Again, I feel really lucky that the budget is looking a lot, because it is really minimal increases, that it's something that we can handle. But if we were to hear larger increases, unfortunately, I know for my city and our council, this plays into as we're looking at this restructuring process, and having that surprise last year and then having the surprise this year. I know that it doesn't stir up all the best feelings in Midville, at least, and so that becomes challenging again as we look at restructuring. And so, again, not faulting you at all, but I think that getting these last minute surprises, at least in Midville, it does hurt us as we're in this process.
Chair, I have something, this is a question that doesn't necessarily relate to, and I can maybe do it offline, but I think Richard sent out some information last night on email, and I apologize, I think it was in there, but I've been looking at a lot of UPD figures lately, but it looked like there was a rebate on insurance in the range of about $100,000 on that spreadsheet that I think is what Richard sent out. Is that something that that's built into the budget presentation already, or is that something that we've learned recently? I remember hearing about that.
That was the rebate that came from our insurance, when with Val Moore, because it was for the insurance. You remember, Jason, when that rebate check came in, last year?
Yeah.
We did the budget amendment before
Okay.
December. We had talked about possibly breaking that up and giving it to some of the crossing guards. But we didn't do that. We added the crossing guards into this budget for increases instead.
That's right, I
So
remember that now.
that was brought to the board prior to Debbie being good.
And I'm aware of that, that rebate too. And when that comes in, it comes in as a revenue source. And so revenues and expenditures the difference between that will always fall into the general fund balance. And so it doesn't necessarily carry over into the new year, other than as part of what's in the general fund balance.
I just saw it in that, and I wasn't sure that when it had been realized.
And as you noticed too, you just barely got those yesterday from Rick. And Monday, you got an updated resolution, for or updated items in the agenda. And part of that is because we just, we were really focusing on getting the budget announced. But with that, having said all that, you have before you now a preliminary budget increase maximum. So last November, you did adopt that resolution that we bring this to you in March. We initially had planned to bring one in with a 1.10, well, actually a 1.08 increase. Holiday did make some changes after we met with them. And so it increased it by 0.2, so it was a 1.10 increase that we were going to put in the resolution. Naturally, obviously, once we saw the finding and we had the apportionment that needs to be made by everyone, we had somewhat of a consensus on when you want to pay that back, but we weren't sure. We hadn't heard back from a couple of members. So we had some members that want to pay that back in 2 years. We have one that wants to pay that back in 4 years. We need to know what that is because it will affect what that 1.1% that maximum will be. And so we don't have that in here. We need to know from the board, out of each one of the members, what you want to do with that apportionment so we can plug it in here. So right now, what we stuck in the resolution was your maximum, which was the 4%. But you can amend that as you see fit. We did bring the program in so that we could show you what those changes would be if you wanted to let us know what your thoughts are on how soon you want to quit that, how quickly you want to pay that back.
Can you help me understand, knowing that this organization has 2 years, if it was not paid off in those 2 years, I mean, if there's new organization, are we carrying over that debt or is
No.
it?
We're not carrying over the debt. It would, because it's a because it was incurred under UPD, it would need to be paid under UPD. So once that, once in some form or another, once it's dissolved and the new organization takes place, those debts need to be taken care of, or deficits.
So I don't know that it's going to be dissolved. That's something we'll be talking about. I think, but it is likely that we could have members withdraw based upon the sheriff withdrawing, the county withdrawing potentially. And to me, that merits looking at a shorter time for that rather than a longer horizon. To do it for 4 years is great if we're all together, but if some conflict with the county's based, so shorter time horizon, that makes sense to me. And I don't know whether that that's I think it's probably better if it is, but I don't know. But it would be something I would expect that would be part of that departure formula if the member were to withdraw.
Just as a point of clarification, is that an actual liability? In other words, is the 5% represents a minimum fund balance, but the fund balance would really be considered an asset. So I guess the question is the 3.5 million result in a liability? Or do we still have some fund balance that's just not at the 5% level that the state requires?
Yeah, we have a fund balance of 290,000 in the general fund. It's the unassigned fund balance, the 3.5 that the state is very concerned about, because that 290 obviously doesn't cover that. And especially now where UPD is looking to form under some new organization, you have some liabilities there that need to be covered, and because of that unassigned negative balance, they won't be. And that is why the finding is in there, and that is why the state is requiring that get. They require a minimum, and I think we went over that minimum with each one of you, and that's why it's required that we address this as soon as possible, especially now with what's happening with UPD. So And to answer your question, it would be best if you're all uniform. It would be best if you could get it done in 2 years. But again, that's each one of your individual decision. We can manage it based on what each member chooses.
Are we in a position to be able to show us on here what the full organization member increase would be if we paid it off in 2 years?
Yes, so what it would be if you paid it, you'll be paying it off, you'll be making a payment this year, in this fiscal year, that the state code requires that it be done immediately the year after the finding was done, so you have to do one this year. And then we can plug in what it would look like for next year's budget if you make that second final payment.
Here's the numbers right here for 2 years. To this dark orange.
So that's for the.
That's a 2-year payment.
Sorry, another clarification question, because when you say our second final payment, you're saying this fiscal year, when we say 2 years, you're meaning half of it in this fiscal year and
22,
half of it
23,
in
Yes.
next fiscal year.
Yes,
23, 24.
because the first one has to be done in this fiscal year.
Is there any member that doesn't have a siloed fund balance sufficient to pay the amount?
No.
So I mean, we all have that money in the bank, if you will, in our fund balance, in our individual fund balances. So, you know, unless you're planning on using that to offset your contract amount, it could be.
Yeah, my understanding would be if we just looked at holiday, that we would have to make a budget adjustment this year at 168,180, correct? Is holiday the second?
Yes.
Second. And then, so we would have to make a budget adjustment this year to move that out of our precinct fund balance. And then next year, we would have to budget that 168 again, and then we would be done.
Yep. And so you can see the bottom corner there that the overall budget increase is now still only at 3.45.
Good. Okay. Well, I might be getting ahead of myself here. I was gonna ask if we know, I just want this for my own edification, and I don't know if we know this number, but do we know what a 1% COLA equates to in terms of a percent increase to the overall budget?
We did. I don't know if we still have that figure.
There was a spreadsheet if it's been updated, it showed you could just plug that in, but I don't know if that's been updated to this.
Yeah, it's
budget.
not been updated.
We don't, but we can find that out because we gave it at this meeting.
So you say rather than do a 3% COLA, do a 1%
No,
He's
I would,
asking for the cost.
Just
no,
the other one
I would say the opposite.
of the opposite? Okay.
Okay,
So
so
to
just
add-
for another 1%.
Well, I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but that's what I would want to know is if we went from a, you know, keeping in mind that 4%. Maybe let us resolve, Mr. Chair, sorry, I don't mean to take the meeting over. The feathering piece, I know from holiday standpoint, we were kind of in favor of the 2-year. Try to get this done in 2 years and be done with it, but that was just our preference. I don't know where everybody else is.
That's my preference as well, just because of the uncertainty of who's in, who's out with, we're gonna have a discussion about this later, but I think that some of us are gonna want to target to have this accomplished by the end of this coming fiscal year. So that would allow us 2 years to do it.
I'm supportive of that. Looking at that, this gets us to that 3.45. I was hoping that we could actually look at that 4% number and lower that. But if this looks at 3.45, I would still like to provide a little bit of wiggle room in case something comes in that we're unaware of. So I don't know. I'm interested to look at what that extra 1% of COLA would do. I'll say the other idea that has been floated, at least in mid-November conversations, is if this board, and I don't know if right now or the next year would be, instead of an extra COLA, do we try to hold on to some money and then provide some bonuses for officers who stay with the organization till the end? Because we know that that's a challenge we're likely going to have. So I'd be happy to look at that and just know that that's another thing in my mind. Is there another way to incentivize officers?
Yeah, my only, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask the sheriff. And when I was in the meeting with the first group of Sylvisa, and then you were gonna have another meeting after that. What was the consensus? Do you know?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah. Actually, Midvale's the only 4-year, everybody else chose to.
No, I think we're comfortable with 2, and the reason that we had talked about 4 was on part of being unsure of what happens with the organization ending, and then also for us, just knowing, being unaware of all the startup costs, costs we're gonna have in reorganizing, wanting to see a healthy fund balance as much as possible, just so that we've got money there available, and so wanting to hold on to that as much as possible. But I trying to do this and based on the conversations.
Yeah, my only thought here is if we put this piece in place to provide a ceiling. And I had concerns about the timing of it. I wish we would have gone to April, but the board made the decision to do what they did, which is fine. But I would rather go a little bit higher and get it back to cities, councils to look to start massaging their budget. And then if we need to bring it down, bring it down. What I'm trying to avoid is, I would hate for us to get to May and feel like we got to go higher and then have to take a weighted vote. I just don't think that's what we want to do. So I was just curious if we went to like a 4% COLA.
It's up on the screen now.
Oh, is that it? So that takes us to 4.23.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. And so I would rather go a little bit higher and then adjust down if the budgets don't support it, than have a lower rate and then feel like we're not staying competitive with the market and come back and have to take a weighted vote to adjust it up. So anyway, just a thought. I don't know where the board is on that, but
I'm definitely open to thoughts on that. I think my opinion is still stay at 4 personally. Just as a reminder, with the weighted vote, that is not required an extra meeting. It just changes as we're voting. But I also, Mayor Deli and I have talked extensively about this too, and so I understand.
yeah, or maybe even go to 3.5 and keep it under the 4.23%. Or keep it under the 4.0, which was kind of the target ceiling, but I would rather bump it up a little bit and then if we got to come down, we come down a little bit maybe, because all we're doing is setting a target. We're not approving a final budget, right? That will be done later.
Just the final, you've
Anyway.
got the tentative budget, you need to.
I don't feel strongly about it, but I'd be kind of in favor of maybe taking it up to 3.5%, which would still keep us probably right, almost exactly at 4%, if my math's close. We were at 3.8, right, at 3.
And it was, 3.75 or something like
Yeah,
that.
so it'll put us right at about 4, but anyway, that would be my recommendation.
Rick, is those numbers based on a 5% increase?
That's with the 4% COLA instead of a 3 and your 2-year appropriation.
Can you do the 3.5 that Mayor Dolly's talking about?
3.5 COLA.
I don't know how hard that is to.
Hard.
Give you an idea. The only challenge that we have is we've presented this to you, and whenever you've gone and told your councils, if you can explain it to them that this is a board decision and that we are not just adding new numbers as a surprise, that would help.
Yeah, I haven't showed this to our council yet, so.
Yeah, see, so some of us have already had this presentation and have talked with our councils about it. We talked about this on Monday night, so as the manager is checking with our finance director right now to find out how that affects us, but I would love to have the flexibility, but I can tell you that in terms of what, given what we went through last year in my city, we are not excited about another tax increase.
Well, let's keep it at 3. Just a suggestion.
Open any other thoughts, comments? Unless there's not. That's for motion.
Okay, so with that discussion then, we can the board can decide if they want to set this PBIM at the 3.4.
It's 3.47. The 3.45 didn't include the holidays
Oh, okay.
adjustments.
So the 3.47, that does include the 2-year apportionment to retire that deficit. Or leave it at the 4, whichever you.
And to be clear, I would personally support the 4%, just knowing again, if we need a little bit of leeway within there, but I think I personally wouldn't want to see us go above. I'm comfortable saying that, but I don't know.
Well, I'm waiting for Mike to come back in, but,
Yeah, this 3.47 is at the 3%.
that's probably.
Again, if entertain a motion.
You can
anybody
keep
would
it
like
at the
to make
4
one?
then.
So I'll
Like, to do
I'll make a
more work.
motion to approve resolution 23-03-03 of 2023 to adopt the fiscal year 2024 preliminary levy increase maximum.
At the 4% or the 3.47?
That's at 4%.
I'll second that.
There we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my preliminary plan, it's flexible and it's probably gonna change, just from what you've said today. That you would like this done sooner. So, my intent was to provide a notice of intent to withdraw from the Unified Police Department. Salt Lake County, for Salt Lake County to withdraw on December 31st of 2024, but listening to what you had to say today, we wanted that done sooner. We could change the date to July 2024, if that works best for you. Because we want to work with you, but, you know, from listening what you said, that you wanted it done sooner.
Personally, Sheriff, I think that for the purposes of our municipal fiscal years and fiscal year of this organization, that pulling the trigger on this as of July 1, 2024 is the right date.
Okay. We will, and we can adjust.
That also, I think, provides more surety to our officers about the fact that we're the stability of the organization, and this isn't going to drag on for another year or something like that.
Well, I was just trying to give you more time to plan, but that's fine. The July 2024 works for me. I probably don't need as much time, so I'm happy to do that, and I will provide the chair and Harry a letter later that's signed by Mayor Wilson and myself.
I know for me personally, and open to a conversation with the board on this, is that the sooner we can figure things out, the better. And I think as a board goal of having, I mean, truly the next organization starting at that July 21st, 2024 timeline is what I think would be best. If they will do this as quickly as possible. So that's where I'm at.
And that does change a little bit for me, because there are some things that I'll have to move sooner than that date, just to make it work. But I'm happy to do that. And I'll continue to communicate with you. But if July 2024 works for all of you, then it works.
So our thinking too, and I mean, there are a number of things. I don't know if we're at the right point now, but I guess we are. To meet that kind of target deadline, to some extent, we all know this is a Rubik's Cube. I've said this. We need to know some pieces where some pieces will fall before we can decide what to do. So not only is it useful for us to know what you're planning on, assuming as statutory duties as a sheriff, but it's also going to be useful for us to know from the county council what items they intend to fund as countywide services and whether all of those will be with the sheriff's office or whether any of them might remain with UPD. There's a potential reason why that might make sense in terms of the economies of scale and or just the fact that the service area of UPD, I think, is going to be serving more residents than non-incorporated counties. So I've invited the county council to try to give us some direction on what they want to do at least by July 1, so they can figure this out in a rational way, but also get us enough notice so we can have a year to plan. I've talked briefly with Councilmember Bradley about that, and also with Councilmember Newland. And I don't have any commitment on that. At least they're open to the idea of trying to move forward with all deliberate speed on that, I guess I would say. The other thing I think that we need to know from the county council and or Suplisa, as I understand it, that part of the funding that Suplisa uses is the countywide property tax on the generally assessed part of that. And the county council, as I understand it, has delegated that to Suplisa in the past, and the question is going to be whether that's going to continue or not. That's important to all of us to know what Suplisa will be able to do and what direction they need to go to. So that's also something that would be nice to know sooner rather than later. It'd be great to know that at least by July 1, so that we can then start to figure out what this organization looks like. So that's just kind of a request. I know that we have some other things we're going to talk about a plenary meeting with all of our councils, which I support doing that to make sure that we can get enough people up to speed as we can to understand this process and be valuable contributors toward it and understanding it, because it affects all of us. But those are the kinds of things that I think it'll make it easier for us to solve the Rubik's Cube once we have a couple of pieces that are set. Does that make sense?
I support everything you just laid out. I do think that if by July 1st of this year, we have a better understanding of what all of the different UPD entities want to do, both for just the Minnesota stream you just laid out with the county, what the individual Suplisa members are hoping, and the same thing with cities as well. And again, this is not going to be the case, but if maybe I've said, you know what, we think we're just gonna go our own way, that would be helpful to know at that time, just so as we take that year to plan, we can kind of know who wants to be at the table as part of reorganizing. Having as many of those answers in place just by July 1st, again, for each of our own entities. And I'm curious if everybody thinks that's a realistic timeline, again, at least on a very basic level, to have some answers about continuing to participate. If I should have worded that better, I would ask help there. But
well, the other thing that I'd just like to say about it is that I'm certainly hopeful that we can include everybody who wants to be on board, right? I mean, that would be our goal.
So just to be clear that, I think I'm just going to restate what everybody stated, but we've got certain entities here that have already said, Holiday being one of them, that we want to remain inside a shared services model. We still love the model. We still love the unified brand, and we fully intend on going forward with it, assuming that other people are willing to join with us in that effort, which is what you're saying, Mayor. But we're basically asking the county to give us some direction on what pieces are going to leave and what pieces are going to stay, and see if we can get a better idea of what's going to happen with the townships. We don't know, so that we can then take our fiscal year next year to organize the new model.
right, and I do think it is just how the situation is. It's a little bit easier for the cities to say, yes,
Yeah.
we're wanting to participate. And there is continuously this question around, what does the county do? How does that affect the townships? And so hoping that we can all have some answers just by July 1st of this year. So we have a year to plan what that organization looks like.
But Sheriff, could you clarify? I was trying to understand your position. You're basically saying that you will be staying on board till July of 2024, a year and a half down the road, or,
Until July of 2024.
okay.
It was going to be December of 2024, but sounds like July of 2024 works better for this board. And that will be the final date. So during that time frame, we'll be transitioning statutory duties back. And like Mayor Silvestrini said, it is up to the county whether or not they're going to take countywide services back. And hopefully we know that pretty quick too, because that we'll have to figure that piece out as well.
So the targets would be to know what pieces are going to transition July of this year and spend the fiscal year actually executing that transition. So we know what we're, and then we'll have the formation in place by July of 2024, a new organization in place and the transition complete.
I mean, we've had some discussions about this separately, but I think that July 1 of this year is a reasonable time to come to a conclusion about those things and give us still another year to plan and execute. And if anybody thinks that's wrong, I'm open to discussion about it, but I just think that sounds like an orderly process and gives everybody enough time on the county side, on the police side, on the sheriff's side to solve some of those pieces, and so then the rest of us can figure out what UPD 2.0 looks like.
Yeah, I think it's good to have targets because give everybody something to push towards. I just don't have any, I don't think it's fair to drag this out. And we need to, July 1st of 2025 to me is not something we should be targeting as a transition date. So I'm glad we've got some target dates in place because we need to have something to work towards so we can communicate with all the members of UPD, what it is we're doing, what the end organization is going to look like, what the timetables are, and that we're going to push it as fast as we can push it and still maintain control. So,
Mr. Chair, Phil from White City.
Go ahead, Director Cardenas.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure it was clear that, yeah, the White City is definitely in favor of whatever form of reorganization UPD is looking like in the future. And I was also wondering if you felt that it would be of a benefit that we invite the county auditor to help in the process of this reorganization so we can avoid any future instances where, I don't know, I guess it gets looked, the new organization gets looked at as a potential, whatever, I guess all the things that are causing and bringing about this need to dissolve the current format, but just making sure that, yeah, that we don't have going through this issue again further down the line. So the question was, would it be worth it to invite the county auditor to help us in this reorganization process?
I'm not in favor of that. I think we have a provision under our interlocal agreement that provides for separation, and I think we can do this. If anybody has financial questions, our finance director to do it. I'm not inclined to invite outside help.
I would concur with that. Our county sheriff fiscal administrative team and our mayor's fiscal administrative team will take the lead.
The county auditor, frankly, I mean, all respect, doesn't have familiarity with this organization that the members of this board do. So.
And sorry, and I don't mean the financial auditor part of it. I mean, like in terms of, I guess I'd have to receive further clarification from Mayor Flint, but she was actually the one that had brought this to my attention and felt like she thought that it would be worth asking and having the county auditor get involved. But she didn't refer to it in terms of the financial side, but more of just making sure that the right, I don't know how it exactly word that, but yeah, just that it was getting put together.
Would be far more qualified than the county auditor just because of his familiarity with the county budget.
You're looking at it through the political lens, evaluating what goes back to Salt Lake County and what stays with UPD to protect the future of the next iteration of UPD is an important conversation to have. And countywide services and statutory responsibilities of the sheriff are at the center of that.
The only other thing on my mind, I don't know what this looks like at this point, but it's, you know, talked about this in previous board meeting. Of just the conflict of interest that will happen at some point as you are transitioning out and we are planning, and that is, I still have that concern is, even with that end date, the July 1st, I don't know, leading up to that, are we gonna run into some clear conflicts?
I don't see any conflicts, actually, you know, there shouldn't be any conflicts at all. I'm here to help. I didn't create this problem. And that kind of questions my integrity on how to move forward. I don't see the conflict. I don't know what kind of conflict you're referring to. I want UPD to succeed in any way they can. There is going to be a split though, and if you have concerns over that, we need to know that now. Because if I need to go even quicker, we need to know that. And you know, whatever this board decides, I'll do. But I do not believe that there would be a conflict in this, us trying to split this organization. It's basically take the county is withdrawing just like any other city. You still have everybody in place. We still have operations that have to be done. And you know, budgets that have to be done.
Just to be clear, Sheriff, I'm not trying to question your integrity on that. It's just being the executive of overseeing two organizations, and I think it's a little bit different than a board member just because you're the executive. And so it's not about you individually. It's that I think you're trying to look out both for the best thing for the sheriff's office and the best thing for restructuring. And I think there could be a point where those conflict with each other. And so that's just I don't know what the answer is but that's what's floating.
Yeah, I don't know what that answer, how to answer that for you, other than the fact that I'm committed to, you know, UPD is our family. We're committed to helping that piece of our family. And yes, we are having to go back to the sheriff's office. Like I said, I didn't ask for this. But it is what it is, and we're gonna make it work. And I do know that statutory duties are gonna go back with me on whatever date works best for you. That's what I'm asking. I could do it quicker, but I want to make sure that UPD is taken care of. So if you have questions or concerns in that way, we've got to address that up front, because I don't want to get halfway through and then those concerns come on. You know, I don't know how to answer that other than how I just did.
I think it's more a question, I mean, in this, just know, I have utmost respect for your integrity. It has nothing to do with that. But bandwidth, you know, are you going to need to focus your attention more on reorganizing the sheriff's department? Are you going to have time to do both? Would it be helpful to have somebody focusing on the UPD side while you focus on the sheriff's side? I think that's a question that I have.
And as far as bandwidth, I've been doing this two jobs for 6 years, so I don't think that is an issue. I have a great team on the sheriff's side that is ready to, you know, take that piece on. So I don't have to worry as much. I just want to make sure that the UPD folks, our people, are taken care of, and I don't want to just leave them in the hands of people who don't have the experience. So we've done this before. We've split before. We've created before. And to, you know, bring somebody on that's the board's choice. I'm just here to say that I'm committed to help. But if you choose to do something different, I just need to know so we can make the transition quicker.
Oh, I was just saying, it was a separate one, which was brought up, going back to the dates for the town of Brighton. since we are basically county patrol, and that is state mandated. I definitely support having the information from the county as soon as possible of what their intent is, because that will greatly have an impact of what the town of Brighton decides to do. Because we have the ability to be separated from the city, which we don't want to, but if we have to, we would. And that means we would contract with UPD number 2 or whatever it happens to be called. But and maybe that we just need the information so that we know what direction we can go, whether it's staying with county control, whether it's not, whatever it happens to be. So the sooner that we have that information will help us to make that transition.
Well, and I think part of our goal here was that at the summit, that people can bring to the summit some more information of what are the townships going to do? What is, the county council? I know we're going to talk about the summit, but that would be the goal, is to try to bring everybody together and come up with a better plan. I do like the deadline of July to actually have everything set so we could start moving forward. Harry's going to talk about committees that need to be formed because there's financial issues, there's legal issues, even with just the county withdrawing. We've got to see what is the impact. Can UPD stand alone without that county piece? That has to be looked at too, because we don't want to throw that impact at you with less than a year to plan out. So all these things have to be done. And I agree, we need to know from the county on that side too. And I will work with these 2 county representatives to find that information out for you. And with the goal that let's get this summit scheduled as quick as we possibly can and get some answers.
Any other comments on this item for the chair report?
Other than the summit, that's on the same
That
agenda.
is next.
Oh,
up.
it's next, sorry.
Yep, so we'll just move into that right now. So item 10, the proposed UPD member summit and set date and agenda for summit, including subcommittees to study and prepare for reorganization of UPD.
Thank you, members of the board. So one of the issues that I guess in looking at this mandated reorganization, and I call it that because it is not a dissolution. So the UPD does not have to dissolve. There are statutory provisions available now. We can simply do what UFA did and amend and restate our interlocal under a different statute. But we do know that the impetus to making these changes are that we're not going to be able to stay partnered with the county. So it's kind of a forced divorce. But as we go forward in studying this, I think it's important to know that step 1 is general communication between the members of the UPD as to what our next steps are. And as part of that, one of the things that we have discussed is the possibility of doing a summit of members, not just members of the board, but actually members of the governing bodies attend as well, where we outline, for discussion, what 374 did do and what it doesn't do, so that there's clear understanding in terms of all of the members of the UPD as to what our next steps can be, rather than simply, the press has been running, UPD will be dissolved. That is the message out there. Everybody thinks that's the case, and it's actually not the case. So that they know that this organization can continue without the county and what steps we need to take to get there. And so the purpose of the summit is to basically pick a date, invite whoever can make it, what dates would work for you, and then have it where I've actually just put together a very preliminary draft agenda for the summit, but it's something that, we could add or take away some subjects. And the purpose of the summit is to clarify what's going on, to invite discussion as to what people would like to do. One of the issues, of course, is timing. It sounds like that maybe has been sort of preliminary targeted for July 1 of 2024, and that's fine. That gives us a date to move forward with. And one of the other things we were going to talk about in this, that summit would be the committees. We could talk about it today, but I really think that implementing committees with, members of staff from the various members participating and on these committees, I've outlined, for example, a legal committee, a finance committee, a personnel committee, facilities, IT, Lisa, Salt Lake County discussion committee, you call it negotiating, but it's the same thing. So we have discussions ongoing fairly quickly in different areas as we move forward, that would report back to the board on the progress they're making. We have a lot of talent just in this room, some of it sitting on the back wall or in the middle. People who went through the first iteration of forming the UPD from the county, they were involved in those discussions. Our chiefs, some of our more senior members that can offer their expertise in certain areas as they go forward with their discussions, like what facilities will we use? There's nothing in this statute that passed for the bill that doesn't allow us to maintain contracts with Salt Lake County. It's just, I think that what will cause further scrutiny and perhaps dissension is if it looks like it's too friendly of a relationship. But in terms of being, full costing for us contracting with them or our Salt Lake County contracting with us for certain things, those are the discussions we can have and wouldn't be prevented from doing that. So if there's a transition period where we can talk about staying in the building longer if we don't have a facility to go to, or using IT or funding gangs, or however we want to do this. There's a lot of flexibility going forward.
So Harry, sorry, but I think we're way ahead on the idea of committees at this point. And I'm opposed to that idea. Right now we have to solve, before we can, I don't want to have 6 different committees doing 6 different things without coordination. That's not going to be helpful. It's going to be too scattered of an approach at this point. I think we need one committee that works on the issues with what is going to be, what's the sheriff taking, what's the county funding, and what's going to be left in this organization. And once we know those things, then we can form committees if we need to. But frankly, having a number of committees, especially as many as you're referring to, without some coordination with the central group, and that central group is this board. Okay, I just think it's too scattered, and that will actually be counterproductive. You have people going off in one direction without a portfolio, really, because they don't know the answers to some of these questions that they have to plan for. Until we know what kinds of elements are going to remain in this organization, like forensics, all the things. It's tough for a finance committee to do anything, or a legal committee to do anything. So I just think we keep this either as a committee of the board, or if we want to form a separate committee, that's fine, but it should be 4 or 5 people, and we only need one committee right now.
And Jeff, I agree with that. I think it should be the whole board because there's such different perspectives. Townships versus cities. David and I was being under Lisa, but also county control. So I think that this should be the whole board rather than just a committee.
There are 2 committees, I think, that subcommittees, I guess we'll call them, that I do think need to get meeting fairly quickly, even if the rest can wait. One is a committee, and it could be the whole board, to begin discussions with Salt Lake County, because I think by July 1st, our plan is to know what's staying and what's going. And the second committee, and this is something that is really not a UPD committee, but a Slovisa committee to start looking at funding necessities and possible changes in statutes, because that committee, and it would be a Slovisa committee, but I would strongly recommend it be, is, we've had commitments from the bill sponsor that they will pass legislation to assist us in this change. And it's an opportunity to look at what Slovisa may need if it needs a statutory change, or what is Labisa going to do? Because that will also govern in some ways the decision in July as to what Labisa is going to do, which will.
Isn't Sublisa the board that does that? I mean, I don't see another committee. I see that's the Sublisa board and its staff. And then with respect to, I mean, I think that there is merit in having a smaller group than this board to have discussions with the county council. I've actually, in my conversations with interviewed and Jim, kind of floated the idea that maybe even the county council should appoint a couple of members that could speak for the county council, but they at least, you know, trust them to have negotiation. That's all I think.
So I guess the original proposal of having a summit, first of all, is the question, is something that the board thinks would be beneficial? If it is, then I would ask that there be direction in terms of a possible date. And the second one would be, obviously, it could either be decided now or then. Do we want to discuss committees at that point, or do we want to limit it to one or two committees to move forward with discussions with Salt Lake County?
So I agree that the summit is a good idea, so that we get a message to all the members of mayors and councils for all the jurisdictions, and we are essentially on the same page. And I think there may be questions that we can answer at that about, we know about this legislation, we know about what the sheriff has just told us. I know that we have some council members on this call, and I'm sure there'll be more interest in this subject as we move forward. But I agree with doing that. In terms of forming committees at that level, I'd like to see our councils have discussions about this. At this point, you know, there may be council members that aren't on this board that want to participate, and that's awesome if they want to. But the expertise about this organization, I have more confidence that it resides with those of us that have been involved with the organization for a long period of time on the board.
Period. So this idea of the summit came up in our budgetary one-on-one. So I don't know I don't know if the rest of the board has been these conversations around what the summit is supposed to be and why. If you would just take it couple minutes to talk about that, and then we can have this conversation if the board feels like it's worthwhile.
Sure. One of the reasons why I actually thought about the need for a summit was the press reports that came out right after the bill passed committee. A lot of statements were made by certain members of certain entities that UPD is dissolving and they don't know what they're going to do, and others saying maybe we'll contract with this entity or that entity, and it seemed like that there was and they didn't come from members of this board. It came from other members of councils, and it seemed like everybody was going in 20 different directions on the summit. And so I got thinking that, you know, bringing the organizational members back into focus on what the bill means, what it doesn't mean, and moving forward is important, not only for your residents who are all asking questions, have been interviewed on TV saying that there's not we don't know what we're going to do, we don't know who's going to control our neighborhoods, to I think get the message out that the world's not on fire, that we have a plan and that we'll move forward. Second, it's important to the members of the UPD in terms of the employees, the officers, the command level, that we let them know that we have been working on a plan. So I think that the difficulty in terms of having the bill pass is it created a lot of questions that some are easily answered, some will take some time. But I think a summit to talk about these things will be helpful and beneficial in terms of both reassuring your residents and reassuring our officers that this organization is strong and can remain strong going forward. And that's probably the main purpose of the summit, is to just get everybody on the same page going forward. And I do think it would help. Now, maybe we move beyond that, but it was the initial reaction to the bill that caused me to believe that we need information going out beyond just the board to maybe members of councils and others, to let them know that you know, it's not time to start dismantling the UPD. It's time to figure out the plan moving forward, that it remains a strong organization.
So there's a list of discussion items that I put on here. In fact, I could pass this out and pass it around. And again, this is a very rough agenda.
Can I just add something while you're passing this rough agenda out? And that is the idea that, again, the way that we had talked about it was around doing this summit, and that we would invite all of our individual councils. I know for me personally, I think I've got some council members that instead of them hearing all the information secondhand from me, but having the opportunity to ask some questions here directly from the other entities that are part of this organization would be really helpful. And so the idea of this is that this board would we would set a date and time, and then we would invite our own groups to attend that. We also talked about, because there are so many people in there, I don't know, Harry, this is still in mind, we had also talked about hiring a mediator. Facilitator for that, thank you. To help keep the conversation moving, so open to all of that, but again, some of the background of why, how this summit came up.
So I
I'd like
appreciate
to
that.
clarify one point first, Harry, before we move on, is I think this is conversation that needs to happen both with the administration, so at the executive level, as well as the council level. So in county government, at least, the mayor's office is required to do all the contracting and all the different things for the county. So it's not an exclusive conversation with legislative bodies, it's executive and legislative. And at least how we operate at the county is we work collaboratively together to figure out the long-term solutions about what's best for the county. And so I just want to be clear on that, because I've heard a lot of this being deferred to the council, and I think it's bigger than that.
Okay. I don't mean to do that, but I know the council is the money, but it's going to appropriate the funding. So.
And I apologize too. When I look at mostly mayors on here, I know we have a few council members, so I address it in terms of involving councils. Obviously, that's not meant to slide any.
I just wanted to clarify.
I know
That's
how
all.
important
I'm
that
not
is to
slighted.
be.
I don't feel slighted. I don't know that anybody
But then-
does. I just think it's important to be clear on that.
And
And
I-
the sheriff is the elected law enforcement official of Salt Lake County. So her input on this is also good.
And I've tried, we've coordinated all of this. Sheriff's looked at whatever I've put together. And I mean, these are suggestions trying to move the discussion forward more than anything else. And I put some names on here as people talk about certain issues. I guess I call it everybody on there has been voluntold, because I didn't ask anybody if they would be willing to head up a certain discussion point. We can move that around. But it was just to kind of facilitate discussions going forward on the various topics, and we can change this. The purpose again is just to get the big communication meeting going, and then start implementing from there. All of the discussions we're going to have, and I understand your point there in terms of let's not go 20 directions. Let's find out what the county's doing, and let's have that committee meet, and then maybe from there we can. Broaden it out to specific committees looking at specific issues over the time period that we have before it would be us to go forward as an organization without something like that. And so I guess the first question is, if you would like to do a summit, it would be nice to have enough time to ensure that we can get as broad a participation as possible, and also time to pick and hire a facilitator. So that would be question number one, is when, what is a date that works for you, first of all, and what you think might work for your administration or council members going forward.
Can I ask? First of all, it's my belief that if we're going to have a summit, as much information as we can have before we gather, the more productive the summit would be. And I may be misinterpreting this, but I believe that there's a unanimity among feeling that the UPD model is worth saving. The model and working within that parameter, that we're all looking at how to make this work given the new rules and boundaries. And I'm wondering if there's some onus on the county to make the first move, meaning the mayor's office, meaning the sheriff, and maybe the council as well, in terms of what we're seeing as possible, what we're willing to commit, and not have that as a contractor, I think, but a solid idea and have maybe that summit revolve around what we've initiated in terms of a plan. I'm throwing that out just real quickly. I don't know if that would be more productive, cutting to the chase, rather than having this conversation at a summit and then regathering to have this conversation.
Yeah, the real question is, I'm sorry, Carolyn, go ahead.
I was trying to find a way to summarize what you were saying. It's one of the things I was gonna say is that if we had a summit now, let's say tomorrow, and then we would have to have another summit once we know what the county's gonna do, because that's gonna totally change things. So do we wait until we know what the county, but that would be too long. I don't know how often we get that information from the county. And maybe the county should be part of our summit so they can hear what we're saying. Another thought is if we had a meeting tomorrow and we had the county people come and listen to us, then they would know what we're thinking. And that might help them make their decision of where they want to go with. So I see three possibilities, basically.
And just one last thing. You started, Harry, by saying that the legislation didn't destroy UPD. And I think that's an extremely important message,
Yeah,
that there's a lot of latitude of what can happen. And so let's not move it into a fit of despair as we try to deal with it.
Yeah, and the interlocal was created under the Interlocal Cooperation Act, so it's not, UPD is not dissolved by that legislation. What the county has to withdraw, that's what has to happen. So I think this is a good discussion. I mean, kind of the question is, do we as board members, as members of our individual councils, feel that our council members are yearning for a session with all the other council members to either get questions answered or to talk about this or not? If maybe it's premature, as Jim suggested, to have a kind of, unless there's a need to calm the waters or explain what the bill actually provides in that kind of a global way. I agree it would be more productive to do it once we have something to talk about.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, my question was, what is the summit for? Is the summit an informational piece for other council members that want to be informed, or is it a decision-making event? And, that would be my question, but to answer your question, no, my council's fine with having me come and update them on the progress the board is making in this endeavor to try to figure out what UPD 2.0 is eventually going to look like. So, but I would be happy to invite them if it's an informational piece to go through where we're at so far and, kind of vet out what the issues are. I'll probably bring a council member along with the city manager, but other than that, no, I would see that as being a pretty unwieldy event to have 100 people there all throwing out what their opinions are. But if it's just educational, it's here's where we're at this point, and council members want to attend, great. But I think to have it be a decision-making event would be tough.
The other thing you might consider, Harry, is just some bullet points that could be distributed, some answers to some frequently asked questions kinds of things. Is UPD dissolved? No. Why? That might be something, because the other thing that I think if we have a summit like this, you're not going to get everybody to come to it. I mean, no matter what date we might select for that, and there are going to be conflicts. So maybe if we're concerned that is something that would be helpful, maybe just doing something like that, bullet points in writing might solve that. And then if we need to have a plenary meeting, doing it when there's something to actually discuss or talk about. If we have a meeting like that, the thing where I question what its utility really is, each one of our councils has to make decisions for our own municipality based upon our own budget and our own circumstances. It's really tough to negotiate that in a meeting with, I don't know how many, 100 people, 150 people, something like that. That is going to be unwieldy unless it's just to answer questions.
I think that the recommendation for having a summit was to answer questions and calm the waters. more than anything else, and you know your councils, and if it appears that the initial shock of UPDs dissolving is not the issue anymore, that it's how are we gonna go about this restructuring, then I don't know if it's as necessary at all. I think the purpose of the, and the recommendation for it was, even just as of 2 weeks ago, there seemed to be a bunch of misinformation that was leading people to look at alternatives to UPD that really aren't necessary, that kind of made me recommend, and we discussed it, is it's time maybe to have a sit down where we can inform everyone that is a member of the UPD of what the future looks like, rather than have it out there as a bunch of people hearing rumors and responding to those. And so if, you know, as you know, your administrations, your councils, if they know that we're working towards a reorganization, then I think that it's unnecessary. It is just something that I felt that we needed to kind of start providing direction to both our employees and to your residents that, hey, this isn't something that's not doable for us, and we can do it. But if that message is out there now, and now it's nuts and bolts, the summit may not be as important as well.
The most effective way to do that, I would think, is the responsibility of we board members to carry that message back to our councils, saying, look, things aren't as dire as you may have heard. Here's what we've got going, and here's the light at the end of the tunnel. And that's a much more efficient way. And I don't know about the others, but I want to believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they kind of look at us for Savista or UPD to give them information on how things are looking, and they respect what we say. And that may just fulfilling our responsibility as board members and the conduit for information to our councils might solve all of this, Paul.
Maybe in addition to that, we could do a joint statement of our commitment to work together on what the next iteration of UPD is going to be. And that we're going to do that with the best interest of public safety in mind for our entire community. So perhaps a statement that comes from this board collectively about our intention to work together through that lens about what the future of UPD will be and what role of Salt Lake County will be, and working through those things together might be a way to calm the waters just as effectively as bringing 100 people together in a room to discuss.
I agree, and I think that it might also, you know, a press release or something like that from the board might also be something that it's not just our councils, but it's our communities. It's and there's probably more questions about this from you know, just members of our communities who aren't necessarily connected to the council meetings where we brief our council members, or aren't as familiar with the budgeting and all things like that. So let's work on the press release. That's a good.
I agree with what both of you are saying there. I think that probably the biggest source of understanding and a lot of questions would be not so much the cities, but will be Savista, because the future of Savista is a huge question, and we don't know that until we get the county to help us with those answers. So I think that the townships, the town of Brighton, are more questioning and have more questions and more insecurity, you might say, of what's going to happen. I'm sure that they passed that. Part of that bill was like, okay, well, you're not going to use your officers and firms or magnet, but the funding mechanism, there's huge questions there. The townships and town Brighton.
Yeah, I mean, maybe holidays unique, but I don't know. This whole deal about calming the waters, and our residents, I haven't had one call. And we've put out an article and we're trying to communicate. Our residents are not panicked about what's going on. They just expect us to communicate with them. And quite honestly, our council is the same way. Our council, we inform them, we keep them up to date. So if we've got time and resources to spend, I would rather have them spent on the Solisa piece and the county piece, because for the rest of us, we're kind of in limbo until we get some clarity on what it is we're going to have to work with. So if we want to have a summit that's informational for some council members that want to be more informed, I think that's great. Whoever wants to attend can attend, but if we've got time to spend on issues, I'd rather have it spent working with the county and working with getting this Solvisa piece clarified so that we can get to work on the shared services piece that we're gonna have to put together inevitably when the county and Solvisa decides which direction they're gonna go.
Well,
That's just my opinion.
as an alternative, I mean, if any of you would like me or anyone, I guess, from UPD to come talk to your council about this. So if that helps, the offer's out.
I'll just, for information's sake, so everyone understands, the county is actively engaged.
Yes.
I've been sitting on a committee for 4 weeks now already, looking at the fiscal analysis of the separation of the county from UPD. That relates to the sheriff's statutory responsibilities and the countywide services. So we're looking at it holistically to understand what that looks like as far as what, and then we have to scale, obviously, shared services back to the county to understand what that fiscal impact looks like. So we're actively engaged, but I'll be very honest with everyone. It's much more complicated than perhaps we're laying it out to be. There are 55 contracts between Salt Lake County and UPD that exist today, and all have to be looked at and all have to be considered in that analysis. So I'm a little anxious about the July 1 date of knowing exactly what the county is going to do. But please understand that we've taken this very seriously and we're already engaged in looking at this from a fiscal analysis standpoint. And I think it's in the best interest of UPD long-term to be very cognizant and thoughtful about any contracting or anything as it relates to the county, because I think that is the double taxation narrative and the narrative about unfair treatment for certain cities over other cities all stems from. So I'd be very thoughtful about any engagement between UPD and Salt Lake County moving forward, because I think it continues that narrative on some level.
So I guess I think the main thing is trying to make sure that we're all on the same page with a similar message. If it's a joint statement is the best way to do that, then I'd be supportive of going that route. I do want to make sure, and maybe this conversation is I want to make sure that our officers and our communities know that we're moving forward, putting pieces into place. And I guess I don't want the message to be sent like, well, we're letting it out until July 1st. And so I know that there's a lot of work internally happening in different groups. So that's another piece that's on my mind with this is how do we make sure that it's communicated, even though if we're not having committees, if we're not doing a summit, and we're saying July 1st, and how do we show officers that we're moving forward?
There's been a suggestion of a press release. I think that, you know, we can work on something like that, circulated to the board if you're fine with it. Just indicate that, you know, members can sign off on it. We'll talk about the mechanics of that, since that's kind of a new idea we hadn't really thought of. Do something like that and maybe put the summit plan on hold for now. It sounds like that's what the board would like to do. So in terms of an action item to approve it, I guess just at this point, table it for now, but work on a press release, is what I understand you'd like us to do.
Yeah, I would contemplate the press release just saying the board is committed to the shared services model of the Unified Police Department, and that we are going to work collaboratively with the sheriff and the county to ease the county separation and continue to be as a viable police force for our communities.
We'll approach it with the health and public safety in mind at the heart of it.
Was that?
Sure.
Second, any discussion on that? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes. Don't know if we need to know that here now. Okay. All right, item 11, upcoming subcommittee meetings. We just have the finance committee meeting on Tuesday, April 11th at 8 a.m. Any other upcoming meetings we should be aware of that aren't stated there? Okay, item 12, approval of the February 16, 2023 UPD Board meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that? All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. Any other business? Okay. So entertain a motion to adjourn.
Slide into some pretty quick.